Welcome to this explainer. I'm your host, an experienced teacher educator and language assessment specialist, and today we're jumping right into a really fundamental text, Chapter 6 of Assessment for Language Teaching by Ich, and Constant Leung. We're going to take a nice deliberate pace today because we are unpacking some incredibly powerful concepts, and they all center around one absolutely crucial theme: purpose. Why do we assess? To keep this super practical, I'm going to share this whole exploration through the lens of two people I've been working closely with lately. First, a brilliant Chinese postgraduate Ch6 student who is just laser-focused on building her assessment literacy. And second, a really passionate early career language teacher who desperately wants to apply these principles with true purpose in his real-world classroom. All right, let's get into it. Okay, before we get lost in the weeds, let's anchor ourselves with three big takeaways. Number one, test design. It's not just throwing a bunch of questions on a page. It's a highly systematic, iterative process driven by a clear purpose. Number two, the techniques you choose have to align perfectly with the target construct you're actually trying to measure, like a lock and key. And number three, non-test assessments. These aren't just backups or secondary options. They are incredibly powerful, real-world alternatives to your standard traditional exams. So keep those three things in mind as we go.
So, here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with a brief intro, move into the test design cycle, and then look at how to choose the right assessment techniques. After that, we'll shift gears into contemporary formative approaches, talk about designing non-test tasks, and then wrap the whole thing up with a reflection on assessment literacy.
Starting us off with Section 1, Introduction. Let's just ground our concepts here.
You really can't build a great assessment without knowing exactly what its purpose is, right? Just the other day, my postgraduate TESOL student asked a question that hits the nail on the head. She said, what is the actual fundamental goal of summative assessment, or SA, compared to, everything else we do in the classroom? And it's a great question. The core purpose of SA is gathering cumulative evidence of students' performances and then judging it against pre-established learning outcomes or standards. Basically, it's about looking at that final end product of learning and making a reliable decision about what a student has actually attained.
Moving right along to Section 2, let's look at the test design cycle.
Now, Ch6 and Leung present this process as a continuous loop, an iterative cycle with 5 distinct stages: plan, develop, administer, score, and use. The really cool thing here is the connection between use and plan. Every single time you use a test, the data and feedback you get should feed right back into how you plan the next iteration. So a test is never truly finished, it just keeps evolving to better serve its ultimate purpose.
When we were talking about this, my postgraduate student immediately connected this cycle to her own research on test validity. She was super curious about what actually happens in Stage 2, the develop stage. And honestly, this is where the heavy lifting happens. First, you create test specifications, which researchers like Davidson and Lynch describe as the absolute blueprint of your test. Next, you draft the actual questions and tasks. And finally, and this is absolutely crucial, you pilot and improve those tasks before using them for real. You literally have to make sure the test measures what it claims to measure before it ever sits on a student's desk.
All right, Section 3, choosing assessment techniques and matching them to your construct.
So our early career teacher brought a really interesting classroom scenario to me recently. He was trying to assess academic writing and asked, how do I actually match my assessment technique to this specific construct so it fulfills my educational purpose? To answer that, we have to look at two major categories. On one hand, you have selected response, where students just choose from provided options, think multiple choice. On the other hand, you have constructed response, where students actually produce their own answers, like essays or interviews. Now think about the limitations of multiple choice tests for productive skills. They kind of invite construct-irrelevant guessing, don't they? If a student guesses C and gets it right, are you actually measuring their language ability or just their luck?
And that right there perfectly highlights why we need authentic, constructed responses when we're assessing production. Just look at some of these authentic examples. You've got closed tasks for short constructed responses. You've got dictation, which is a fantastic integrative constructed response because it pulls together listening, reading, and writing all at once. And then you have role play for extended constructed responses. When we discussed this, our early career teacher was thrilled. He instantly saw how throwing a role play or a dictation task into his own classroom would minimize that random guessing and let him assess real, authentic language production with a clear purpose.
Let's pivot a bit. Section 4, Contemporary Formative Approaches.
Up to this point, we've talked a lot about standardized summative testing. But what if the primary purpose of our assessment is to support ongoing learning? How does that actually play out? Well, enter dynamic assessment. This approach targets a student's current capacity while they're right in the middle of a task. Instead of just sitting back and watching a student struggle, the teacher steps in with scaffolding and feedback fine-tuned to that specific student's needs right there in real time. It completely blurs the line between teaching and assessing, which is just brilliant.
Now, while dynamic assessment is usually a specific interaction, learning-oriented assessment, or LOA, is a much broader cyclical approach. It blends together formal and informal assessments, both inside and outside the classroom. LOA looks at the whole picture, the entire educational environment, the student's cognition, their affect, meaning their emotions, and the broader social contexts. It's essentially this holistic ecosystem of assessment, entirely driven by the purpose of continuous learning.
Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second because this next theoretical concept is a bit heavy. Usage-based assessment. This is built on the theory that frequently used pattern language features within a specific context are the ones most noticed and learned. So, what does that mean for you on the ground? It means that local, real-world language exposure should dictate your assessment focus. Assessing Thai students learning English in Thailand requires a fundamentally different focus than assessing students learning English in London. Why? Because their daily exposure and real-world communication purposes are just entirely different. Then we have scenario-based assessment, which uses imaginary real-life scenes to generate these interconnected, collaborative language tasks. This creates such a dynamic pedagogic space. It solves so many of those traditional classrooms headaches because it allows students to string together smaller pieces of language to achieve a much larger real-world communication goal. It's a perfect alignment of the assessment task with practical, real-life purpose.
Moving on to Section 5, Designing Non-Test Summative Tasks.
So how do we actually design for this? How do we evaluate what a student has achieved outside the bounds of a strict timed exam? Well, one of the most effective ways is portfolio assessment. This approach totally breaks away from that single high-stakes snapshot. It's incredibly learner-centered, collecting student work over a period of time. And the critical part here is that it includes drafts and outlines, not just the polished final copies. It evaluates the whole developmental journey, the ongoing processes, just as much as the final outcomes.
But of course, this brings up a very real practical concern. How in the world do we ensure reliability and transparency in these subjective, non-test conditions? Honestly, it's the million-dollar question. And the answer lies in carefully developed assessment rubrics and rigorous rater moderation. Think about it. Without clear rubrics, students can't self-assess, and teachers can't provide transparent, consistent scoring. The rubric is the anchor. It ties that subjective assessment straight back to objective standards.
And finally, Section 6, Reflection on Assessment Literacy. Mastering all these frameworks, it is definitely not just some academic exercise. It is all about empowerment for teachers, for students, and for policymakers. And it loops us right back to those 3 core takeaways from the very beginning. Number 1, test design is a systematic, iterative cycle. Remember that loop flowing from use all the way back to plan. Number 2, you absolutely must align your assessment techniques with the specific constructs you want to measure. And number 3, never, ever underestimate the power of non-test assessments when you need to capture genuine, real-world language ability. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, provocative question to mull over. How does empowering students, through things like self-assessment and scenario-based tasks, transform not just their real-world language use, but our own assessment literacy as educators? When we assess with true purpose and clarity, we aren't just measuring learning, we are actively creating it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating frameworks in your own practice.